know that feeling?
Yeah.
That quiet, nagging sensation at the back of your mind telling you that the mainstream narrative you've been fed just isn't adding up anymore.
Right. You look around at modern institutions,
From the medical establishment to the education system,
to the corporate HR department.
and you can sense, almost viscerally, that they have been captured.
You're tired of being told what to think.
And how to act, and what it means to be a man in today's society.
Exactly.
You are looking for the raw, unfiltered history of how male sovereignty was slowly, methodically eroded over the last century.
And you want to understand the actual mechanics behind it.
Well, if that describes you, you are in exactly the right place today for this deep dive.
You really are.
But before we unpack all of that, I need to explicitly tell you right now, hit that like button and subscribe to the show.
You do not want to miss the deep dives we do here.
Because today's discussion is a comprehensive review of a brand new, absolutely explosive ebook.
It's titled Hemp, a Genius Plant by Conrad Reicher.
Published in 2025. And I'm going to tell you right out of the gate, you need to go check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy this book for yourself.
And while you're at it, follow the author at Conrad Reicher on Substack, Twitter, and YouTube.
Trust me, by the end of this conversation, you are going to want to read his original words.
Because our mission today is to tear into Reicher's ultra-long, incisive, and honestly fascinating manifesto.
Yeah, and we need to be clear about who this is for. This is a book written specifically for a red-pilled, manosphere, men's rights activist, or MRA audience.
That is exactly his target demographic.
And Reicher's core argument is incredibly bold. He posits that the criminalization of hemp wasn't about public health at all.
Not even close.
He argues it was the first major step in a coordinated, century-long effort.
First by corporatists?
Right, and later by feminists and Marxists to capture Western institutions and fundamentally neuter male independence.
It is a massive, sweeping thesis.
It really is.
And it's an incredibly ambitious framework. But before we really get into the weeds of this text, I think it's vital we set some ground rules for how we're going to approach it today.
I agree completely.
Because the source material we are looking at contains highly charged, political and gender-focused content.
Specifically, very sharp critiques of left-wing ideology, modern feminism, and our current institutional structures.
Right. So I want to make it crystal clear to you, the listener, that we, as your guides on this deep dive, are not taking sides.
We are not here to endorse, validate, or debate the author's political viewpoints.
Exactly. Instead, our job is to impartially report, analyze, and synthesize Reicher's thesis for you.
We want to explore exactly why this specific perspective is resonating so deeply with a growing demographic of men who are actively seeking to reclaim their autonomy.
We are treating this text as a cultural and historical artifact. We're going to examine its arguments, its data points, and its philosophical architecture.
To understand exactly how Reicher views the world.
I think that's the perfect way to frame it. So where does Reicher start?
Well, he doesn't just launch into a dry historical lecture.
Sure.
He actually roots this entire massive manifesto in a very personal origin story.
Which I found really compelling.
Yeah, he talks about being 34 years old and suffering a severe back injury.
A very common starting point for a lot of guys.
Right. And like so many men who enter the modern medical system looking for a fix, he found himself quickly drowning in prescribed opioids.
And the way he describes that experience is haunting.
It is. He talks about losing his cognitive edge, losing his ability to sleep properly, snapping at his kids.
Essentially, he felt his sovereignty, his ability to govern his own life and household slipping away from him.
But the turning point for him comes when he tries full-spectrum hemp, grown by a master cultivator.
And he describes this grower as a guy who understands the plant the way a master blacksmith understands steel.
That distinction of full spectrum is actually crucial to his later arguments, so we should probably define it quickly for everyone listening.
Yeah, we definitely should. When Reicher says full spectrum, he means utilizing the entire chemical profile of the plant.
So the trace THC, the CBD, the terpenes, the flavonoids.
All working together synergistically rather than just an isolated pharmaceutical-grade extraction.
He's arguing for the raw, unadulterated biology of the plant. The plant as it grows out of the dirt, not something cooked up in a lab.
Right. And Reicher claims that within days of using this full-spectrum hemp, the fog lifted.
He explicitly states that his pain didn't magically vanish.
He's not selling snake oil here.
Exactly. But his relationship to the pain changed. He could face it. His thoughts sharpened. He felt like a sovereign man again, back in control of his own body.
And that profound personal reclamation is what launched him into this massive research project in the first place.
It's a really powerful narrative device, transitioning from his own lost physical sovereignty to the lost historical sovereignty of the American male.
Because he argues the very foundation of the United States is deeply intertwined with hemp.
Yet you will not find a single mention of this in a modern high school history book.
He cites a 1765 diary entry from George Washington.
Make the most of the Indian hemp seed.
That's the quote. Now, Riker emphasizes that Washington wasn't writing this as some 1960s counterculture figure.
He was a general, a farmer, a patriot.
Right. At that time, hemp was a strategic military and industrial resource. The British Navy relied on it heavily for rigging and sails.
I was reading that section and it blew my mind. He mentions Thomas Jefferson drafting the Declaration of Independence while wearing a hemp shirt.
And Benjamin Franklin literally printing early American Bibles on hemp paper.
And the Mayflower. The sails that brought the Pilgrims over were woven from hemp.
Riker calls it the duct tape of early America. It was foundational.
So from his perspective, the fact that this history is met with total silence today isn't just some accidental oversight.
To Riker, it is an intentional erasure.
By institutions that have systematically scrubbed traditional self-reliant manhood from education.
He argues that modern schools don't teach boys how to plant, how to build, or how to fight.
The things that actually built the civilization.
Exactly. Instead, they teach boys to sit still, obey, and wait for permission from an authority figure.
But Riker takes the history back much further than just the Founding Fathers.
Oh yeah, he goes way back. He takes the reader on a tour of ancient religious and warrior cultures to show that this plant has always been tied to masculine duty.
He brings up the Assyrians who used cannabis as a temple incense.
But he draws a very sharp distinction here. The priestly elites used it to sharpen their focus.
To endure long rituals, to prepare for spiritual and physical struggle.
Right. They didn't use it to, as he puts it, connect with their feelings, or sit around in a circle holding hands.
The contrast he draws there is fascinating. It really highlights the culture clash he's trying to expose.
He talks about the ancient Scythians using it in heavy, intense rituals to commune with the divine.
And Hindu sages consuming bhang before deep meditation.
But the most striking example to me was the Augur elite tribes.
Yes, that part was incredible. He details how archaeologists found these shamans buried with cannabis in wooden trays deep in the frozen Pazyryk tombs.
And Riker is absolutely adamant that these weren't New Age peace and love shamans hugging trees.
He calls them elite psychonauts.
For the listener who might not know that term, he basically means explorers of the psyche.
But in a very structured, disciplined way. They were the guides of the soul, using the plant to protect the tribe and maintain order between the physical and spiritual realms.
And this lays the groundwork for perhaps his most controversial theological and linguistic argument.
This is where he brings in the work of Sula Benet.
Right, Sula Benet was a Polish anthropologist and linguist. Riker uses her work to analyze the book of Exodus.
Specifically Exodus 30:23.
In this biblical passage, God commands Moses to make a holy anointing oil from a specific list of ingredients.
And one of those ingredients is phonetically pronounced cannabosum.
Now, for centuries, traditional interpretations and standard biblical translations have translated cannabosum as calamus.
Which is just a type of common fragrant marsh reed.
Exactly. It sounds incredibly mundane.
But Riker, leaning heavily on Benet's linguistic and botanical analysis, asserts that cannabosum is actually cannabis.
Bennett argued that the root can means reed or hemp, and bosom means aromatic.
And that over time, through various translations from Hebrew to Greek to Latin, the word was simply mistranslated.
This is an absolute linchpin in Riker's argument.
He is positing that the highest form of religious authority in the Judeo-Christian tradition, direct divine command, sanctioned, and in fact mandated, the use of this plant for the consecration of priests.
And the way he uses that translation to mock modern culture is pretty brutal.
He points out this massive inversion in modern society. On one hand, you have Orthodox churches today preaching total abstinence against the plant.
And on the other hand, you have secular women leading what Riker derisively calls wellness retreats.
In places like Malibu or Sedona.
Where they sip overpriced CBD smoothies and, as he frames it, cry about their childhood traumas.
He argues that both sides have completely hijacked the plant.
To his MRA audience, he says that ancient warriors used cannabis not to escape their duty, but to fulfill it.
It was a tool for integration, for carrying the heavy, isolating burden of leadership and protection.
He looks at modern, highly commercialized wellness culture and sees it as emotionally indulgent.
Completely stripped of all its historical masculine power.
And this ties directly into his concept of gynocentric institutions.
To understand why Riker is so angry, you have to understand how he defines this term.
For Riker, a gynocentric institution is one that prioritizes emotional validation, safety, consensus, and compliance over autonomy, risk-taking, and biological reality.
He views the suppression of hemp's warrior history as part of a broader, deliberate agenda to make men soft, reliant, and compliant.
He asks the listener to look at how the ancient shaman has been replaced by the modern psychiatrist.
The sacred, arduous ritual has been replaced by the quick prescription pad.
The pursuit of vision and clarity has been replaced by the assignment of a clinical diagnosis.
In Riker's view, this institutional shift is the root cause of why modern men feel broken and why, in his eyes, civilization is decaying.
So if we follow his logic and we accept his premise that this plant was foundational to early American self-reliance and ancient masculine duty.
How did we get from George Washington demanding we plant it to the DEA kicking down doors and throwing men in cages over it?
What actually changed?
Exactly, because Riker argues it wasn't a sudden concern for public health.
This moves us into his analysis of the early 20th century.
He outlines what he calls the unholy trinity of cannabis prohibition.
We're talking about Harry Anslinger, William Randolph Hearst, and the DuPont Corporation.
Break this down for us because Riker claims this was a cold, documented corporate coup.
That's exactly how he frames it. Let's look at the players. First, you have William Randolph Hearst.
He was a massive newspaper baron, essentially the pioneer of yellow journalism.
But more importantly for this story, he owned vast timberlands. His entire empire relied on wood pulp paper.
Then you have DuPont.
In the 1930s, DuPont was transitioning from being primarily an explosives manufacturer to a chemical giant.
They had just patented synthetic fibers like nylon.
And they were developing new, lucrative processes for making plastics and synthetic materials from coal and petroleum.
And hemp was standing right in their way.
A massive obstacle. Hemp grows up to 15 feet in 90 days.
It produces a fiber that is significantly stronger than cotton.
And it does so without the need for intense chemical pesticides.
You can make paper from it far more efficiently than from timber.
And you can make bioplastics from it.
So to Hearst and DuPont, hemp was a direct existential threat to their emerging monopolies.
It was a cheaper, renewable, decentralized resource that anyone with dirt could grow.
And that's where Harry Anslinger comes in as the attack dog.
Precisely. Anslinger was the first commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics.
He needed a crusade to justify his department's budget after alcohol prohibition ended.
According to Riker, Anslinger became the bureaucratic enforcer of this corporate will.
Hearst's newspapers began running highly sensationalized, often deeply racist articles linking marijuana to crime.
Specifically targeting Mexican immigrants and black jazz musicians.
But the actual legal mechanism they used is what Riker finds so insidious.
He points out that they didn't just pass a law saying hemp is banned.
Because they knew they couldn't justify that on safety grounds.
Right. Riker delves into the mechanics of the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act. He calls it bureaucratic castration.
What the government did was place an exorbitant tax on the cultivation, prescribing, and selling of the plant.
But the catch was, you needed a special tax stamp to legally pay the tax and do business.
And the government simply refused to issue the stamps.
It's a classic catch-22, a paperwork trap.
Exactly. Overnight, self-reliant American farmers, men who had been growing this crop for generations to provide for their families, were transformed into federal felons.
Riker highlights that the medical community actually fought this.
He brings up Dr. William Woodward,
who is the chief counsel for the American Medical Association. He went before Congress.
He testified that cannabis had legitimate, long-standing medical uses and that this tax act would severely harm patients and doctors.
But according to Riker, Woodward was entirely ignored because the legislative system was already captured.
It was protecting DuPont's patents and Hearst's profits, not public health.
And the sheer hypocrisy of the state during this era is what really fuels Riker's fury.
He points to what happened just 5 years later, in 1942. World War II is raging.
The Japanese have cut off the U.S. supply lines for Manila hemp in the Philippines.
The U.S. Navy is suddenly desperate for cordage. So what does the government do?
The USDA produces a propaganda film literally titled Hemp for Victory.
They went to the very same American men, the farmers they had just criminalized, and begged them to plant over 350,000 acres of hemp.
They needed it for parachutes, for ropes, for the rigging of the ships.
They admitted they needed the resilience of this plant to win a global war.
But the second the Axis powers surrendered, Riker notes they immediately shredded the program.
Classified the plant again and went right back to arresting men for growing it.
It is a stark historical contradiction, and Riker uses it to build a bridge to the modern war on drugs.
Specifically, Richard Nixon's campaign in 1971.
He uses this era to cement his overarching argument about state control over the individual.
He cites a very famous, very controversial 1994 interview with John Ehrlichman.
Who was Nixon's domestic policy chief.
In this interview, Ehrlichman admitted on the record that the war on drugs was a political tool intentionally designed to target and disrupt two specific communities that the Nixon White House saw as enemies:
Anti-war protesters and black communities.
Ehrlichman essentially said they associated the hippies with marijuana and black people with heroin, and then criminalized both heavily.
This allowed them to break up their leadership, raid their homes, and vilify them on the evening news every night.
And Riker takes this documented historical fact and applies a very specific manosphere lens to it.
He argues that the cultural trope we all know, the lazy stoner, the apathetic, couch-locked loser eating junk food, was an intentionally engineered myth.
It wasn't an accident. Why would the state want to promote that image?
Riker asserts that the administrative state and the female-coded leftism that he believes runs its institutions are absolutely terrified of the autonomous patriarch.
Let's unpack that term, autonomous patriarch, because it's central to his worldview. What does Riker mean by that?
Well, think about it from his perspective. An autonomous patriarch is a man who is entirely self-sufficient.
He grows his own food, he builds his own shelter.
And crucially, he cultivates his own medicine.
A man like that cannot be easily taxed.
He cannot be drafted into a foreign war he doesn't believe in because he isn't dependent on the state's economy.
He cannot be manipulated by modern corporate HR departments or forced to sit through diversity training.
Because he simply doesn't rely on the corporate system for his survival.
Riker's provocative interpretation is that the system had to pathologize this man's independence.
They took his self-reliance and labeled it apathy.
They took his quiet introspection and diagnosed it as mental illness.
And they took his natural medicine, the hemp plant, and classified it as a Schedule I narcotic right alongside heroin.
And he backs up this sociological argument with some very compelling modern data.
He highlights a 2018 study from the University of Chicago that looked at states that had legalized hemp and cannabis.
The study showed that in those states, there was a 12% decrease in male imprisonment within just 3 years of legalization.
12%. That's a massive shift.
Riker uses this to hammer home his point to his readers.
Yeah.
The right to grow your own medicine and your own fiber is directly, mathematically linked to keeping men out of the prison industrial complex.
The system, he argues, is a vast machine built to break masculine will and extract labor, and hemp is the biological tool to break that machine.
Which perfectly sets up his transition from the historical and political realm to the hard biology.
Because if you're listening to this and wondering, okay, but why this plant? Why is hemp the hill he's dying on?
Riker explains that it's not arbitrary, it's written into our DNA.
This brings us to his section on the endocannabinoid system.
And I'll admit, some of the biology went a bit over my head. Can you break down what Riker is actually talking about here? What is the ECS, and why does he think it's the biological blueprint of the male brain?
Absolutely. The endocannabinoid system, or the ECS, is a complex cell signaling network inside the human body.
It was only formally identified in the early 1990s by researchers who were actually studying how THC affects the brain.
What they discovered was that the human body produces its own cannabinoids, endocannabinoids, and has specific receptors designed to interact with them.
Riker explains that this isn't some random biological quirk or an evolutionary accident.
It is a precision-engineered network that maintains homeostasis, or balance, across almost every major system in the body.
He details the two main receptors, CB1 and CB2.
Right. And he maps those receptors directly to masculine traits. He explains that CB1 receptors are heavily concentrated in the brain and the central nervous system.
Their primary job is regulating mood, memory, pain perception, and aggression.
And as Riker points out, if you are a man in a leadership position or a man facing adversity, these are the exact traits you need to command.
You have to manage your natural aggression so it's useful, not destructive.
You need to remember your training under duress.
You need to control your mood when the pressure is on.
He basically says the CB1 receptor is the control panel for stoicism.
That's a great way to put it. And then you have the CB2 receptors.
These are found mostly in the immune cells and the peripheral tissues, and they primarily govern inflammation.
Riker writes that for elite athletes, soldiers, laborers, mechanics, men who push their physical bodies to the absolute edge to provide and protect inflammation is their constant companion.
It's the physical cost of their labor.
The ECS is nature's built-in recovery system. It manages that inflammation.
But, Riker argues, because of our modern, highly processed industrial diets, chronic sleep deprivation, and the beastline stress of modern life, our natural ECS is severely depleted.
We are running on empty.
And this is where Riker draws a really sharp, aggressive contrast between the natural regulation of the ECS and the synthetic solutions offered by Big Pharma.
He views the pharmaceutical industry not as healthcare, but as a direct extension of that system of control we were talking about earlier.
He brings in some staggering economic data from IMS Health to illustrate his point.
According to the numbers he cites, the lifetime revenue generated by a man who is kept on a daily, chronic regimen of SSRI, antidepressants, and painkillers exceeds $1.2 million.
Let that sink in. $1.2 million extracted from one man over his lifetime.
Contrast that with the lifetime revenue of an occasional cannabis user who grows his own plants or buys locally, which Riker estimates at around $12,000.
It's a massive financial discrepancy.
For Riker, this isn't about treating illness, it's a subscription model for human suffering.
He believes the medical system is highly incentivized to keep men chronically ill, emotionally blunted, and dependent on synthetic patented chemicals,
Those chemicals generate massive shareholder profits.
allowing men to grow a weed in their backyard for pennies. Completely shatters that economic model.
To bring this abstract biology and economics down to a visceral level, Riker tells the incredibly powerful story of Sergeant Jacob Lightfoot.
This was a story that genuinely stuck with me.
Lightfoot is a Marine veteran that Riker met while traveling in Colorado. Like a lot of guys coming back from intense combat deployments, Lightfoot was struggling.
He was diagnosed with severe PTSD.
And what did the VA do? They handed him what Riker calls a chemical straitjacket.
They gave him a cocktail of oxycodone for his physical joint pain, Xanax for his panic attacks, and Prozac for mood stabilization.
Riker describes how this pharmaceutical cocktail completely hollowed Lightfoot out. It didn't cure him, it just muted him.
Within 2 years, this highly trained Marine lost his job, his marriage fell apart, he lost custody of his kids, and he nearly lost his life to the despair.
He was just a ghost haunting his own house.
It's a tragic, all too common trajectory, and according to Riker, out of pure desperation, Lightfoot finally tried a 1-to-1 THC to CBD tincture.
For the listener, a 1-to-1 ratio means an equal balance of the psychoactive THC and the non-psychoactive anti-inflammatory CBD.
It provides a balanced therapeutic effect without overwhelming intoxication.
Riker is very quick to point out that Lightfoot didn't do this because it was trendy or because he wanted to get high and check out.
He did it to survive. He did it to claw his way back to reality.
And the results, Riker reports, are astounding. Within 6 months of using this full-spectrum plant medicine to regulate his ECS, Lightfoot was completely sober from the VA's pill cocktail.
His mind cleared. He became present again.
He fought a grueling battle in family court and actually won custody of his children back.
Today, he runs a nonprofit dedicated to helping other combat veterans safely ditch Big Pharma and transition to plant medicine.
Stories like Sergeant Lightfoot's are the emotional battering ram of Riker's argument regarding what he terms the feminization of medicine.
This is easily one of the most controversial parts of his thesis.
Riker claims that modern psychology and psychiatry have been entirely captured by a gynocentric ideology.
He argues that this ideology has systematically pathologized natural male behavior.
Traits like male stoicism, risk-taking, physical resilience, and even natural aggression are no longer viewed as necessary components of the human ecosystem.
Instead, they are diagnosed as disorders. They are labeled as toxic masculinity that needs to be medicated away.
To support this massive claim, Riker leans heavily on the work of Dr. Peter Breggin.
Breggin is a well-known, often controversial psychiatrist who has spent decades testifying against his own profession regarding the dangers of psychiatric drugs.
Raker cites Bregan's research, which he claims is frequently suppressed by medical journals, suggesting that SSRI's common antidepressants actually increase the rates of violence, agitation, and suicide in young men.
Bregan argues that these drugs can cause a state of akathisia, a severe inner restlessness that can drive men to erratic behavior,
Furthermore, Riker points to a deeply concerning 2021 Harvard study.
showing that men who are placed on long-term opioid prescriptions have a 68% higher suicide rate compared to the general population.
68%.
It's a staggering figure.
Riker uses this data to point out a glaring systemic hypocrisy.
He says, imagine a man walks into a modern doctor's office. He's stressed, he's overworked, he's dealing with the immense pressure of providing for a family in a terrible economy.
He has a 5-minute chat with a physician, and the doctor hands him a prescription for Zoloft.
Society calls that treatment. The man is praised for seeking help and being responsible.
But if that exact same man, facing the exact same stress, decides to use cannabis, a plant that Riker argues naturally downregulates the amygdala, quiets the brain's fear center, and helps balance his nervous system without turning him into an emotional zombie.
Society shames him. The medical establishment slaps a label on him.
They call him an addict. They say he is dangerously self-medicating.
Riker looks at this double standard and says, this isn't medical advice. This is ideological warfare.
He believes the system fundamentally wants men flattened, dull, and compliant, taking their daily pills, rather than sharp, integrated, and sovereign, managing their own biology.
Which naturally leads us to ask, if the plant is this powerful biologically, what happens when you apply it industrially?
Having established the internal biological importance of the plant, Riker zooms out to examine the macroeconomics.
This is where he looks at the global empire of hemp and what he calls the ongoing corporate coup.
He cites data from Grandview Research, a major market research firm,
Projecting that the global hemp market will reach $28 billion by the year 2030.
But Riker argues that $28 billion is a joke. It's just scratching the surface.
The real number, if the plant were truly unleashed, is in the trillions.
Because industrial hemp represents a direct disruptive threat to the most foundational global industries on Earth. Big oil, industrial cotton, concrete, plastics, and the synthetic fertilizer industry.
The examples he gives in this section are just mind-blowing. I had no idea about half of this.
He talks about how in 2023, the country of France built 68 social housing units in the city of Lyon entirely out of a material called hempcrete.
Real quick for the audience, what exactly is hempcrete? Because it's not just concrete with some leaves thrown in, right?
Not at all. Hempcrete is a biocomposite material. It's made by taking the woody inner core of the hemp stalk, called the hurd, and mixing it with water and a lime-based binder.
The resulting material is incredibly lightweight but structurally robust.
But the magic is in its cellular structure. Unlike traditional concrete, which is dense and traps moisture, hempcrete remains breathable.
It regulates the humidity inside a building naturally. It doesn't crack under stress the way concrete does because it has slight flexibility.
And most amazingly, because of the chemical reaction with the lime, hempcrete literally absorbs carbon dioxide out of the air and petrifies it as it cures.
It is a carbon-negative building material.
That is insane. So you're telling me we could be building houses that clean the air and we're just not?
Riker notes that the Lion project resulted in a 70% drop in energy use for those buildings.
No massive government subsidies required, no green energy gimmicks, just pure applied physics.
And it's not just housing. He looks at aerospace.
He points out that the FAA has already certified certain hemp-based composites for use in aircraft interiors.
Aviation giants like Boeing and Airbus are actively looking at these materials to cut the weight of their planes, which dramatically reduces fuel emissions.
He also talks about hemp bioplastics. These are materials that are structurally stronger than petroleum-based plastics, but if you throw them in a landfill, they decompose in months, not millennia.
But here's the catch, and this is where Riker's conspiratorial view comes back into play. He argues that big oil lobbies relentlessly to keep these technologies restricted and underfunded.
Because their entire trillion-dollar business model relies on permanent pollution and single-use waste.
And the suppression isn't just happening in manufacturing, it's happening in the dirt itself.
This is where Riker introduces the concept of agricultural control.
He unearths a 1998 internal memo from the agrochemical giant Monsanto, which is now owned by Bayer.
In this memo, Monsanto executives referred to industrial hemp as a weed that must be contained.
Now, why would a massive chemical company be terrified of a plant?
Riker explains the modern cycle of agricultural dependency. Today, Farmers are locked into a system where they must buy genetically modified, patented seeds every single year.
Riker brilliantly likens this to DRM, digital rights management, but for dirt. You don't own the seed, you rent the right to grow it.
Furthermore, to grow those proprietary seeds, farmers must also buy the specific synthetic fertilizers and the chemical pesticides, like Roundup, that the seed requires.
It is an inescapable financial loop.
And hemp just subverts that entire paradigm.
Entirely. Hemp has a deep taproot that breaks up compacted soil and prevents erosion.
It grows so fast and so dense that it naturally suppresses weeds, eliminating the need for toxic herbicides like glyphosate.
It doesn't require massive amounts of synthetic, petroleum-based fertilizers.
In fact, it actually repairs damaged soil through phytoremediation, pulling heavy metals out of the earth.
Riker views the act of a man growing a field of hemp as the ultimate act of botanical disobedience, because it completely severs the farmer's reliance on the corporate chemical supply chain.
But, as Riker details, the system fought back. And they did it in a very sneaky way.
A lot of people listening to this probably remember the 2018 Farm Bill. It made a lot of headlines.
The media touted it as this huge victory that finally legalized hemp in the United States.
But Riker calls the 2018 Farm Bill a leash.
Yes, the bill legally differentiated hemp from marijuana, but it imposed a strict, entirely arbitrary legal limit of 0.3% THC on the plant.
If the plant tests at 0.4%, it is legally considered marijuana, a Schedule I drug, and must be destroyed.
Riker argues this incredibly low ceiling was lobbied for by corporate interests to ensure that the plant cannot be utilized to its full, robust potential for full-scale medicine or high-yield industrial fiber.
To illustrate the absolute cruelty of this bureaucratic regulation, he shares the heartbreaking story of Joe Kowalski, a third-generation independent farmer in Kentucky.
That story is enraging.
It really is. Joe took a massive risk and planted 42 acres of industrial hemp, hoping to save his family farm.
He invested his life savings. But when the state inspectors came to test his crop right before harvest, it came back at 0.32% THC.
That is 0.02% over the legal limit.
A margin so infinitesimally small that it falls within the standard error rate of most calibration testing labs.
It's essentially a rounding error.
Yeah.
But the state regulators didn't care. The law is the law.
They ordered heavily armed police to oversee Joe as he was forced to set fire to his own fields and burn his entire crop.
He lost $420,000 in a single afternoon.
Riker looks at that and says, "This isn't farming, it's fake farming."
It's a humiliating ritual of rules designed not to guard public safety, but to protect corporate monopolies and bankrupt independent men who try to step outside the system.
And Riker contrasts this localized bureaucratic sabotage of American farmers with a stark geopolitical reality.
He points out a glaring strategic failure. Right now, the People's Republic of China controls roughly 80% of the global hemp textile production.
While the USDEA is raiding warehouses in Nebraska over 0.4% THC readings and financially ruining men like Joe Kowalski in Nebraska.
Chinese state-run conglomerates are aggressively mass-producing hemp-based ballistic fabrics, biodegradable electronics casings, and military-grade composites.
Riker frames this not just as a domestic economic imbalance, but as a severe national security crisis engineered by our own domestic bureaucratic cowardice.
We are legislating ourselves into a strategic disadvantage.
Riker doesn't pull any punches when he compares the men actually doing the work with the activists who are just making noise.
He takes a very controversial stance here, taking aim at the modern, mainstream environmental movement.
He looks at a figure like Willie Nelson. Now, Willie is 90 years old, and he is pushing the Texas Hemp Initiative.
He co-founded Farm Aid decades ago to rescue the independent men who actually feed the nation.
Willie's initiative is about pragmatic, gritty action saving family farms and planting a crop that can sequester up to 10 tons of CO2 per acre.
Riker sharply contrasts this dirt under the fingernails action with what he views as the performative environmentalism of the modern left.
He absolutely blasts climate activists who fly to global summits in private jets, who mandate corporate DEI seminars while ignoring the working class men managing the land, and who push massive industrial soy diets that are directly linked to the deforestation of the Amazon.
For Riker, real environmentalism isn't about carbon taxes or feeling guilty. It's about masculine production.
It's about planting crops that actually fix the soil and build the houses.
This critique of performative culture and societal expectations brings us to the final and perhaps most philosophically dense section of his manifesto, the myth of toxic masculinity and reclaiming fatherhood.
Having established the deep history, the biology, and the macroeconomics, Riker tackles the cultural narrative head-on.
He traces the origin of the term toxic masculinity. Most people don't know this, but the term was actually coined in 1991 by a man named Shepard Bliss.
Bliss was a former military man turned academic who was involved in the mythopoetic men's movement.
He was trying to describe a very specific, unhealthy, militarized detachment from emotion, what he called toxic traits, to distinguish them from deep or healthy masculinity.
So it actually started as a term meant to help men.
Exactly. But Riker argues that this specific nuanced term was completely hijacked by postmodern academics.
He specifically calls out gender theorists like Judith Butler.
According to Riker, the academic left mutated the term into a cudgel. They stripped it of its original meaning and used it to deconstruct gender entirely, erasing biological imperative.
Riker claims they use toxic masculinity to shame men for their natural biological instincts, the drive for ambition, the capacity for physical strength, the utility of stoicism, and the desire for leadership.
But Riker doesn't just sit there and complain about it. He offers a practical framework for his readers.
He calls it the Red Pill Protocol for Smart Cannabis Use.
And this is where he surprised me, because he argues that cannabis is absolutely not an excuse to check out of reality, sit on the couch, and play video games.
To Riker, it is a tool for mastery. He grounds this protocol in the ancient Aristotelian concept of enkritheia.
For the audience, enkritheia roughly translates to self-mastery or self-control.
It's the philosophical idea that a man's reason should guide his desires rather than seeking to completely kill those desires or be ruled by them.
It's about integration, not abstinence or hedonism.
Exactly. Riker advocates for treating cannabis use like a performance metric.
He tells the man reading his book to track their use meticulously, treating their biology like a science experiment.
He recommends using specific data tracking apps like StrainPrint.
He actually shares his own personal data in the book, showing how tracking his exact dosage, the specific terpene profiles, and the timing of his use led to a 41% quantified reduction in his baseline anxiety.
It improved his hyperfocus during periods of deep work, and it completely fixed his sleep architecture, allowing him to achieve deep REM sleep.
The protocol is about using the plant tactically to manage stress and stay razor sharp. As he writes, a man doesn't run from temptation or stress, he manages it.
This concept of disciplined self-mastery is completely at odds with how mainstream society and the media portray the male cannabis user.
And Riker highlights the glaring, often absurd double standards in parenting and pop culture to prove his point.
He asks the reader to look at the cultural icon of James Bond. Across 24 official films, James Bond is depicted consuming roughly 109 alcoholic cocktails, usually martinis.
He is celebrated globally as the absolute pinnacle of suave, sophisticated, competent masculinity.
Alcohol, a substance that acts as a neurotoxin and kills millions of people globally every year, is framed by Hollywood as a symbol of elegance and control.
But then look at the other side of the coin. Riker points to the absolute moral panic that ensued a few years ago when Elon Musk took a single mild puff of a joint on the Joe Rogan podcast.
The reaction was hysterical. The media went into a frenzy. Pundits on financial networks questioned his mental stability.
Investors panicked, questioning his fitness to lead.
And this was despite the objective fact that he was simultaneously running multiple billion-dollar bleeding-edge tech companies, launching rockets into space, and building electric cars.
Riker uses this juxtaposition to illustrate how the culture eagerly romanticizes a toxic, physically destructive substance when it's packaged correctly by the establishment.
But hysterically demonizes a natural plant that fosters introspection and independent thought.
It's a profound double standard, and Riker argues it has real devastating consequences for men, particularly fathers.
This is where he looks overseas for a model of sanity. He unpacks the Dutch policy known as gedoogbeleid, which was established way back in 1976.
The Netherlands took a very pragmatic, almost Aristotelian approach. They officially separated cannabis from hard drugs.
They regulate it, they tax it, and culturally, they treat it essentially like alcohol.
And the sociological data Riker cites from this experiment is compelling.
According to Eurobarometer data, Dutch parents are 43% less likely to report severe family conflict over substance use compared to American parents.
But more importantly, for Riker's MRA audience, the Dutch Child Protection Council, the Quinbestemming, operates on logic, not hysteria.
They do not rip children away from their parents simply because a father has a cannabis plant in his greenhouse or uses it in the evening.
They only intervene if there is objective, evidence-based proof of impairment, abuse, or neglect.
Which is a stark contrast to what happens here in the States. This is where Riker delivers his absolute harshest, most vitriolic critique of the United States legal system.
He cares into the U.S. family courts and prohibitionist lobbying organizations like Mothers Against Pot.
Riker sees these entities not as protectors of children, but as brutal enforcers of state control.
He argues that the family court system is highly female-coded, biased, and routinely weaponized by ex-wives and aggressive divorce lawyers.
They use the stigma of cannabis to separate fathers from their children, terminating parental rights over the use of what is essentially a botanical supplement.
In Riker's view, the state is terrified of the autonomous father.
A man who grows his own food, who treats his family's ailments with plants he cultivated himself, and who teaches his sons to think independently of the school system.
Such a man cannot be controlled. Therefore, Riker argues, the state uses the manufactured moral panic generated by groups like Mothers Against Pot to legally neuter him.
Strip him of his progeny and maintain a strict monopoly on child rearing.
He writes that these prohibitionist organizations don't actually care about the welfare of kids, they care about supremacy and compliance.
He says they operate like ideological drones, endlessly repeating sanitized slogans about public health, while simultaneously cheering for militarized SWAT teams to raid the homes of men who are simply trying to provide for and heal their families.
It is a very dark, very intense, and highly adversarial view of the legal system.
But for the men reading this book, men who may have been through the absolute meat grinder of family court, men who have lost their savings or their kids to this system, it is a perspective that resonates to their very core.
It validates their lived experience.
It gives them a framework to understand their pain, which brings us to the culmination of this massive work.
If we are to step back and summarize the incredible breadth of Conrad Riker's thesis in Hemp, a Genius Plan, it is this.
Hemp is not merely a drug to get high, nor is it just an agricultural commodity to make paper.
In Riker's framework, hemp is a foundational human technology. And more importantly, for the modern man, it is the ultimate tangible symbol of male sovereignty.
According to Riker, the simple act of putting a seed in the dirt, understanding its biology, and using it responsibly to govern your own mind and body is an act of decentralized biological rebellion.
It is a total rejection of a captured, gynocentric administrative state that actively profits from male sickness, emotional fragility, and lifelong pharmaceutical dependency.
He is telling his readers that they have been lied to for a century, that their historical inheritance has been stolen by corporate greed, and that the path to reclaiming their strength is literally growing right there in the dirt.
It is, in essence, an agricultural and biological revolution. He's calling for a return to the soil to fix the soul.
And whether you agree with his intense political framing, his views on gender, or his historical interpretations, you simply cannot deny the sheer volume of history, scientific data, and raw passion he has poured into this argument.
He has built a fortress of a thesis.
He absolutely has. It's a call to arms, just without the guns. And that is why I'm reminding you right now, if you want to understand the cultural shifts happening right under our noses, if you want to know what the men who are checking out of the mainstream system are actually reading and thinking, you need to engage with this material.
You really do.
Please hit the like button and subscribe to this deep dive so we can keep bringing you these intense, unfiltered breakdowns of the books shaping our culture.
But more importantly, you need to go buy Hemp, a Genius Plant by Conrad Riker.
It is available right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. If you want more of these unapologetic essays exploring the intersection of men, nature, and freedom, you must follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack, as well as on Twitter and YouTube.
He's building a massive community there that is deeply engaged with these ideas, and you'll want to be part of that conversation.
As we wrap up this deep dive today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering question to mull over on your own time.
We've explored Riker's intense views on history, the biology of the male brain, and the mechanisms of state control.
But let's take a step back from the politics for a second and just consider the sheer objective utility of the plant itself.
If a single plant, requiring nothing but basic dirt, water, and sunlight, can theoretically provide our medicine, our fuel, our housing, and our clothing,
how much of our modern political and economic system is actually built on solving human problems?
and how much is simply an artificial cage carefully built over a century to manufacture our dependency?
That is the question you need to be asking yourself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.